Welcome to another episode of the Podcast Monitor. Last time we finished up the parser portion to parse the RSS feeds, and looking at it at the end of last time, one thing that was discussed was whether whether we should do some kind of refactoring here. This function, not very clear, kind of has a lot of parameters, kind of is a little messy. It's actually doing two things. It's both getting a value and it's also setting a value. You look down here, a lot of repeats on things. The calls are a little confusing because they do two different things. You kind of have these chunks that could probably be divided up more logically. You also have this information that's kind of like related to each other that we could always also abstract out. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the fact that we have all these functional tests written that will verify if, given a string of some sort of data, that we're getting back a dictionary formatted with the expected data that we want to be able to parse out. So given this, we can do a bunch of refactoring and be very confident that we didn't break anything. So we should be able to do it fairly quickly. So let's get started. I noticed that I did not tag the last episode there. So that was episode 16. So before we get started, we're going to do a git tag, episode 16. And then the other thing to consider, right, is so since we're refactoring and we have these tests, we want to leverage the fact that we're using Git for refactoring. So basically, if I want to make a change, I'm going to make some sort of change here, and then I can, because I have all the tests, I can run it and verify that I fixed everything and that everything is fine, that nothing's broken. But depending on as I'm doing it, I want to commit stuff very often. That way it's easy to kind of rewind things that I'm doing. Now, because I have a good set of tests, I could commit less often. The other thing that I could do is I could create another branch off of this one, do all the refactoring there, move it into smaller commits. But since we're already on kind of a working branch here, let's just do it all here. And I might just kind of do the commits and just add a little thing to the front of it so that they're all like refactor commits. Okay. So I think there's kind of two ways we can go about doing it. We can kind of refactor some stuff here and then refactor this method. Or we could refactor this method and then come down here where we're calling it and then kind of, start dividing stuff up and moving stuff around. I think this is probably the bigger problem area, and then this will probably affect and might give us other ways to kind of refactor this later on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to separate out so this is add value. It's actually doing two things. It's finding the value, doing the parsing, and then it's adding it into the dictionary. So why don't we split that out into two different methods? So we'll say, or at least a separate helper method for now. So we'll say get value, and we don't need to. So now we don't need the dictionary here. We don't need the key, but we'll keep passing the element, the tree path, and the attrib key. And in this case, unlike this one, which doesn't return anything, here we're going to actually return a string, since that's what we're basically parsing, is everything's going to be a string. And then we can simply take this code here, move it up into there, and then here we just want to return value. And it looks like attrib key, you see that, And then here we're just going to say value equals self dot get value. And then we're going to pass tree path, and attrib. Okay, so now let's do, we have the virtual environment already open, so we'll do Python, and then this is the parser functional test, so everything passes. So we'll say great, git commit, refactor, pulled, literal parsing into get value. Cool. So now I think one thing is we kind of want to clean this up, right? So we're doing two different things here. So one thing that we're doing is we're saying that, so if there's no attribute key, we're just doing the find text, right? So if we're looking at the RSS data as an example, right? What we're, in one case, we're getting an attribute, and in one case, we're getting what is literally a value. So I'm actually going to change this. I'm going to... okay, so I'm thinking if we have like a get attribute, and then a get value, and then so we're going to want to change the name of this one. So if the value is actually the thing that's in between the tags, so basically, like, what is kind of a common name for attribute and value? We could say, we could just say get string. So given a path and an attribute key, we want to get value, get attribute, get yeah, I think that's fine. Get string. I like that. All right, so now we have to quickly change this to that, and I'm just gonna add in so let's say e element path str, and the attribute is going to need and then here we'll also need a self, the element, and then a path. And we're both going to return strings. Honestly, I guess we could just say get. Well, actually, you know what we could say? We could say let's say find, no, parse helper. I like that, parse helper. All right, so now that we have all these kind of named and stuff, let's verify that it works, and then we'll come back and we'll say git commit. I'm just gonna use a shorter -r, renamed method and added simpler helper method signatures. Okay. So now let's come up in here and so, okay, so in this case, right, what is this one doing? This one's basically doing this. So this one's coming up in here and it's saying return value, and then we're using e.find path, and here we're using I kind of like attrib key actually here just because it is a key. Actually, let's do k attrib. What about that? So it's a little bit shorter. Since this is attrib, like we could name it the same, obviously they're in different contexts, but this is kind of simpler. And then so this one's actually going to be even simpler. This is just this is just return e.find text. There. And then here we're going to say return self.get attributes tree path attrib key, and then get rid of these. In fact, we can get rid of that, and then we can just return self.get value tree and tree path. Cool. Let's run this. Okay, so now we get a failure. And it looks like this failure's, so we're parsing. Let's see, let's just make sure real quick. Let's do a quick spot check. None, value, return. That, otherwise return that. Okay, let's see. So this is outside of it. Element path, get value. So in the get value, find text. Oh, path. Simple enough. And it passes. See, that is why we have the tests, because it makes it a lot faster to do this. So let's do another R. Filled in definitions. Okay, so now basically this one just kind of splits up these, right? So we kind of have this one method that calls into both of these. I'm going to update all of these to match this so that we're consistent on the variables that we're using. And then here we're going to update path. And this we can actually remove this none because that's already that's only getting used through this addif value. And there, and the other thing I kind of want to do is actually change the names of these. So let's say get attribute value. Or actually, why don't we say parse attribute value? This will be parse tag value. And so we'll move these into these spots because those are kind of more descriptive. And then we have a parse helper, which takes an element, a path, and an attribute key. If there is an attribute key, Actually, you know what? Even though it's not necessary, I'm still going to do this because it is kind of an optional parameter, and that kind of then points that out. So, okay, so we have this. Let's add space here. Verify everything works. Git commit. Updated names of things. Okay, so let's see. Is this more clear? Parse attributes, parse attribute value. We find it. If it's not none, then we call value.attrib with the key. Otherwise, we just return, and then we return value. So this just prevents us because we could return here, but then we return none there. The parse one's even easier. Simply take the element and then return whatever you find there. The parse helper just divides between the two, and we could move this functionality now if we wanted back into here, but I'm not going to do that. So then let's just say here, parse and add value. All right, let's check this real quick. Git commit amr add if value to parse and add value. All right. So now the other thing I want to do. So basically, every time here, we're actually passing in this dictionary. Oh no, so it is different because this one we're doing this dictionary. In this case, we're passing in the full tree. So actually, one thing I could do. Yeah, so this is what I'm gonna do. I'm actually gonna go def add save if value, and then I'm going to say here a dictionary to save it in, the key to save it under, and then the value to save. And then here I'm just going to say if value d key equals value, right? And then this becomes self.save if value, and then d key value. And the reason I'm going to do that will be more obvious in half a second. So okay, so the reason I wanted to do that was because I'm actually now going to split this one up, and I'm going to create two different methods, because really this kind of parse and add value doesn't really add much, right? It's just parsing, which then gets kind of split up between these and this save value. But this kind of input, right? I can easily just create two where I either need to pass one or I don't need to pass one, or essentially, right? I can do this, but I can also then create another one and say parse and say, so I can have parse and save Okay, actually, do I want to do this? Parsing. Okay, so actually, no, before I do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these into a method. So I'm going to create two methods. So I'm going to create a method, parse channel info. And the first thing before I do that, I'm actually going to move these up here. I mean, I could move them into the class itself, but I'm gonna. I don't really like doing that as much. I'm gonna move these into here, and then I need to just come through in here and add a self dot that. So we'll come in. And let's just run this real quick. Okay, so now, okay, I missed probably something over here. Right. See, I missed one, but now easy enough to fix. Now say git commit am moved and call those moved XML and S dex into constructor. So now we'll come back in here. Now let's add that back. And we wanted to do this, right? And so now all of this gets moved up into here. And then we're also going to create another, and then we're going to call that from down here. Self.parse channel info. And then we're going to create another method, def parse episode info. This one's actually going to take the element that we're parsing. So we're going to say e element, and then all this is going to come up in here. Let's fix the spacing on it. And then let me spell this right, episode. And then in this case, we're actually going to do return episode, remove that. And so now we're going to come in down here and we're going to say episode equals to self.parse episode info, passing it e, and then we'll say if episode self.deparsed value episodes append the episode, which is the same line as that actually. So now we can remove these because that's all in place. So we have kind of a quick return here. Okay, we're going to change that up in a minute. All right, so that still passes. Git commit am are created parse channel info and parse episode info. Okay, so now let's say parse episodes. And this is going to take episode elements. It's a list. This actually must return dictionary. And then so here we're going to go for E in L episode elements. First episode info. And then so we already determined that we're gonna actually I think we don't actually test this. I think we don't test that if there's no episodes. Right? But there's no episodes, but it's not there's no items either listed. Oh no, we do. And we get an empty list. So we could change that, but I think that's fine. Actually, I kind of like that. So in that case, we are going to keep this the same. And then we're going to loop through. And if we got it, we'll append it. Cool. And now this whole thing goes away. And we can actually just change this to have a single return and say, if there is a list of episodes, call self dot parse episodes L episode list. And then, in fact, we could also do here, let's just run the test real quick on this one. Everything passes. In fact, what we could do here is we could just say, if not episode elements return. And then we can actually just get rid of that, and then no need to do this variable assignment. Remove that, get rid of that. And then this just returns it. All right, so let's run this again. Now that function is obviously very simple. Git commit amr, and then created parse episodes. Okay, so now let's check this out. So we have a parse method. So right, we're creating the RSS parser and we're giving it the data. When we create it, it actually turns it into a string and then sets up these other values, these values that it uses, and then this value, which is actually the value that's kind of used to collect everything and then is returned. So all we do is we call parse channel info and parse episodes. Parse channel info basically parses all these sort of values that we want. Parse episodes basically, if there are any episodes, then it creates an empty list and then it populates that list by parsing individual episode elements that are passed in. This one here, right? So this one's similar to the parse info, where except that it creates this dictionary which it passes in, while this one uses this, and then the element is also passing here, while this one uses that. And then these come into the parse and add. Parse and add has a parse helper, which then divides it into figuring out which one to use, and then it decides to save it there. So there's a few more things we can do here. So we can actually pull this out. We could actually refactor out, and we could create another, right? So we could say def parse. Well, okay, so we had to pull out the data there, right? So let's see if that's feasible. And the other thing is, right, we were talking about, okay, so this parse and add value, and then we have the parse helper, which determines which one to use. But we could also just call this and then call the save. But the problem with that is then that turns this into two methods. So I'd have to say parse using this one and save. Parse using this one and save. I guess the other thing I could do is I could just create, I could get rid of these two methods and create a separate one for this, and then not call the same method here. I kind of like that. So let's say if we did save attribute value. So we need all this. So this is going to be all this information. And the other thing we could do is we could actually introduce kind of a class that would hold this information and then make a determination. And technically, that's actually probably something we would want to do. Self.parse attribute value e path k attrib. It's the value, and then self.save value. And then the other one, no, I don't like this. Get rid of that. Okay, so now, because yeah, I think the real solution is actually to put all of these into like a class and then like move to kind of like a subclass and then like move that in there. So, and then we could always like add more unit tests for stuff like that. But let's try. I do want to try something else. So I want to say. Oh, actually, okay, so that would then help with this kind of part. So let's try this out for a real second, because we can always easily get rid of it. So let's just say, let's create a class in here, and this will be element value finder. Let's do that. And so here we'll say self e element path string attrib str equals none, self dot equals e, self dot path equals path, self dot k attrib equals k attrib. And then down here we would say def actually that these methods here come up actually into here. Then I end up removing all of that and all of this. This button becomes self-define path attrib. And I do for the last one, I say copy and save, paste. Okay, and then this one actually becomes so I copied these, so I won't actually need these anymore. And now the method that calls it, this parse helper, is actually now the string method. And so this then gets updated. Actually, I don't need to even pass any of these anymore, which is what kind of cleans this up. Now here's the one thing to consider is they could return none. So I'm just gonna wrap this here, right? Because the one thing is I wanted to, if at least is none, to at least be that. Well, I mean, returning as a string. I wonder if str none yeah. Okay, so I don't really like that then for the string because it is returning a string, but it really should be returning an empty string just because now even though I exited out. Because if that print true, right, nothing happens. So I don't want to just wrap this here. And if I just want to return the value here, I want to say return value if value is not none, else empty string. And here I want to say so what does this get? All right, so let's go in Python real quick. Put that line in, and then let's come up here, and we'll say. And we'll just say, what we need to put. Oh. Fine, whatever. I want to do t equals from string, give it this. That's what I do this here. And c dot find text. And we'll give it this, which doesn't exist, and we'll see what happens. So see, it's returning none. Okay. Because then if I do this, right, it returns it as that, and that's not what I want. So what I do want to do here is say, I would update this to be value equals that. Return value if value is not none, else empty string. And now that can just return there. Cool. Okay, so now that we've removed all of this, we can get rid of this method. So now we have the parse helper here, and we have all this information that's going to add in here, and we have this that's right here, right? So what this then turns into is, instead of using the parse helper, we actually create a element value finder, given e path and the k attribute. This has to be RSS parser dot. And then we can actually take this, put it in here, just wrap it in a string. And let's see if this works. Yeah, it does. So now the question, I guess, is if this is cleaner. Now, all we really did was move these kind of methods up here. And we said for an element value finder, given an element, a path, and an optional attribute, parse the to parse an attribute value, find it. If it's not none, get this, and then if that's and then return the value if it's not none. Otherwise, return an empty string. Same thing here. Find it, return it if it's not none. Otherwise, return an empty string. And then the string value here that you call, right? So if you create an element value finder, and then you get the string of it. Now, do we want? And then, right, and then do we want to do that? So then it's basically this. So this, and this is just kind of a helper. So now the thing we can also do is we could say, okay, we could create a dictionary info map and create it equal to, we could say title, and then we have a RSS parser element value finder, and then the element for all of these is tree. The path is going to be channel title, right? So we can do this for all of these. So let's just do it in mass. That there, here. Alright, so we can get rid of all this, and then we come here, change this into that. RSS parser dot element value finder, close that. Those are all the same. Add in that there. And now all of these really just become a self dot, or we could, so for all these we say for key value finder and d info map dot items. We basically want to go self dot save if value self.d parse value key value finder. And then we can get rid of all of these. Now let's run it. Okay, and then the same would go for this here, right? So we basically say d info map equals this, come up here. So this is going to be a D episode, just as a reminder. So this is the key. Get rid of that. RSS parser dot element finder. Open this up. Close that. Boom, boom. And then here for key value finder in D info map items self save if value D episode key str value finder. Okay, let's run that. Passes still. Okay, so now there's a very obvious kind of thing here where we have, so we no longer call this, so we actually get rid of that. And now we have a def parse info, and then we have a save dictionary, we have an info map dictionary, and all we're doing is saying for key value finder in info map.items, need a self, of course, self dot save if value save key str value finder, and then this one we use self dot parse info. This is self dot d parse value, and this is d info map. And we'll copy this, put this down here, this down here. Get rid of that. Do this here, get rid of this, get rid of that. Run the tests, still pass. And now that is actually seems super simple. So now episodes, so channel info simply does this. The episodes one gives the list of them, and it figures out, okay, so if I have this list, then go through and then parse this episode one, given the actual episode element, while this one knows the element. So it's basically, right, this one can use the dictionary here while this one's given it, and this one's, so it's passing this in here while this one's using this tree here. So parse info, save value, These are in here. Now we could pull this out, but these are actually given the actual tree. Now the tree is here, but then we'd have to pull that out as well. So I kind of like this, how that is. That's nice and clean. I kind of really like this. And then up here, right? So I don't know if I love the string part, but that's probably fine. And then so the other thing to consider is, okay, so this class, kind of a sub set of this class. Element value finder, given an element, a path, and an optional attribute, and then it figures out. See, okay, yeah, I kind of like this. Now, I don't know if we really need to pull this out. We could pull this out into another class, and then, for example, we'd pass in data to it, right, and be able to say we could parse it. But we're already testing everything that's in here through that other one. And so we could, test it with other random data, but this is just kind of a specific wrapper over this is a generic, and so I kind of like this as it is. So I'm just going to leave this as it is, at least for now. So let's go. So let's say git commit amr created RSS parser dot element value finder class moved save keys and tree paths into maps and simplified methods. Right, again, just to make sure. All right, everything passes. I kind of like this as like a nice, fairly simple. So let's trace through it one last time, right? So I have this. I'm saying, okay, what am I doing? Well, I'm creating an RSS parser. So it's got this subclass, but I don't need to worry about that right now. So what does it do? It takes the data. If there is no data, then it just puts it into, then it creates kind of an empty data set and then calls this from string to get a tree. Okay, it's got these values here and it sets up an empty parsed value dictionary. Cool. So now the method I then call on it, right, is create it and then I call parse. So if I call parse, I'm going to parse the channel info and then parse episodes given a tree using tree.findAll the channel items, right? So the parse channel info comes in here. It's got this mapping of title to these element value finders. The element value finders, right? So now if I come up here, I'm like, okay, well, what is an element value finder? It takes an element, a tree, or it takes an element, a path, an attribute, saves those, and then if I turn it into a string, basically says if I have this optional attribute, call this, otherwise call this. This one searches the path and then returns either the value it finds or an empty string. This one searches the path, and then if it finds a value, gets the attribute, gets the value of the attribute that we have, and then otherwise from there it will either return whatever it found, or if it doesn't find anything, return an empty string. So I'm either getting a string or some value that I found via the path and the attribute. So in this case, right, this is the path I'm giving it in this tree. So the title goes to this path in tree. The language goes to this path in tree, right? And then all I'm doing is calling parse info. Parse info simply goes through the dictionary that's passed here and gets the key in the value finder, and then calls save if value. So this saves it into that parse dictionary, with key and the value that it found. And then so all this is if the value that it found exists, then save it at that key, right? So fairly simple. Come into here, and I'm saying, okay, the other thing it does is parse episodes with this list. If there's nothing there, it returns. Otherwise, it creates a list in the episode value. It loops through the elements, and then cars is parse episode info, and then it appends the dictionary that found into this list here. So what is the dictionary that it finds? So it comes in here, has that same info map with these element finders. This one is using the element that's given though instead of the tree. Just titles. All right. And then calls parse info, and we know what this all does. So it's not simple, right? But it is fairly kind of straightforward. And the other thing that I think it does nicely is, so it kind of pulls this out, abstracts this, and I could always pull that out further, and it's kind of got these tests here. So let's look at the log real quick. So it's like get status, good, get log, 1 line, 20. Okay, so we had a bunch of these refactor commits basically come in here. I'm actually going to open up the terminal and enlarge this a little bit. Let's close this down for a second. I'm going to limit it so it does fit on the screen still. So since there, we basically just did all this refactoring up in here. Now what I'm interested in is, let's look at the git diff XVII. So we added this element finder. This just moved down to here. This add if value is gone, but the save if value is still here, which looks like that was part of this. Parse with this, these are now up here. That parse is gone, but now we have this parse info with this. We have this parse channel, right? So we removed these and replaced them with these. Parse episode info. So really, like, you know, we kind of changed essentially everything, and really kind of moved everything around. But I feel like if you look at it, right, it kind of makes sense how everything flowed. And if we look at like kind of what was here before, right, we kind of have this that we got rid of, which kind of had nested ifs and elses and stuff. We had these kind of long lines of add if value, which had many parameters in it, which instead this one just has this. So if you understand how this works, you understand what this value is, and then it's a simple mapping. And then this, right, it's a simple way of kind of explaining that. Same thing here. Got rid of these. This just exists down here elsewhere, so it's very similar. So I think the main difference, other than kind of adding some, you know, making these functions like less nested and just being, you know, all these functions are fairly straightforward. There's just you know, 1, 2, 3 lines of code, no nesting, just, you know, a few lines to read through. The main thing that we did was we added this into a class, right? And so that's the main thing where, okay, if you can understand how this works, and this basically uses all the, you know, all these finds and find texts and stuff, right? Like this find text is only there, and find, yeah, so other than like using of the name finder, we only use, the only place we use it outside of there is in this parse episodes, which is another reason that it's kind of nice that this is in like a subclass inside that. But as long as you understand how this works, this makes a lot of sense, right? And then everything down here is just kind of basic Python. So I think that kind of works out. I like it a lot. So now I'm not going to complete the parse RSS request because I'm going to create a fake for it next time for the next unit test set, and I'm going to include that as just technically part of this task. This is where, like, you know, maybe these things should kind of be deliverables, but we are at where we're at. So let's go git tag at 17, git log 1 line -10. So we had 10 commits actually with the refactor coming here. For episode 16. Now we basically hit the hour mark at this. So yeah, next time we'll come in, we'll continue, we'll create the fake so then we can do the packaging and close out this deliverable. and then move on to these last few. So until then, see ya.